The lights in the command deck of the Saracen Dawn, the Coalition's flagship training vessel, flickered under the heavy pressure of the simulation. The cadets stood at attention, their uniforms damp with sweat, muscles taut from the constant hum of simulated chaos. The air, thick with ozone and tension, was charged with the energy of the exercise, a test of survival under fire. But today, it wasn't just the cadets who were being tested. In the center of the room stood Cadet James Halter, a human among aliens, his pulse hammering in his ears. His navy blue uniform clung to his skin, still damp from the heat of the simulated orbital strike they had just endured. The room still vibrated from the tremors of the attack, but the cadets remained silent, waiting for the next challenge to unfold. The air smelled of fried circuits and burnt ozone, the aftertaste of an explosion that had barely missed them. James tried to steady his hands, clenching them into fists. He could still feel the adrenaline coursing through him, his breath shallow. He had almost lost control again. His eyes darted across the room. The cadets around him were a mix of species, each with their own set of natural instincts, their own strengths and weaknesses. Some were large and powerful, others small but quick, their alien physiology adapted to environments James could barely comprehend. But none of them were human. None of them had grown up on a death world like Earth. The simulation had gone sideways early. They'd been tasked with maintaining control of a critical system during an orbital strike. When the cooling system began to fail under the pressure, James had made the call. The evacuation orders had come through, but he couldn't leave. Not when they were so close to losing everything. Instead, he had manually rerouted the power, overriding the deck commander's orders. It worked technically. The reactor didn't go critical, the ship didn't burn up in space. But the Admiral, the commanding officer on this mission, wasn't known for his flexibility. Admiral Velzikver stood at the far end of the deck, watching his cadets closely, his reptilian eyes narrowed in scrutiny. His towering frame, with sharp, bony ridges that shadowed his face, loomed over the room. The cold gleam of his polished, stone-like uniform caught the light with every step he took. James held his breath as Velzikver's yellow gaze swept across the room. The Admiral's footsteps echoed, and the cadets flinched as he neared them. James kept his posture rigid, standing as still as he could. His chest felt tight, his muscles locked in anticipation of what was to come. Velzikver wasn't a man of many words, and when he did speak, it was rarely in kindness. "Which of you," the Admiral's voice rumbled, thick like gravel, "thought it wise to override an evacuation protocol during a Class 3 plasma breach?" The silence in the room stretched, suffocating, oppressive. None of the other cadets spoke. James felt every heartbeat in his throat. His palms were sweating. His hands were trembling now, though he kept them at his sides, his body straining to maintain composure. His breath quickened as the Admiral's gaze swung to him. "James." "Yes, sir," he managed to say, his voice steady but only just. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out everything else. Velzikver stepped closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over James. He could feel the weight of the Admiral's presence, every inch of his body screaming to move, to do something, to break free from this impossible pressure. "You believed your judgment superior to Coalition protocol?" Velzikver asked, his voice low, lethal. James stood his ground. "I believed it was the only way to prevent a reactor cascade, sir." The Admiral's yellow eyes narrowed. James could see the calculations running behind those alien eyes. Velzikver took another step forward, his expression unreadable, his posture stiff. Without warning, he reached out and grabbed James by the collar. The pressure on his throat was instant. James' breath caught. It was a symbol of dominance in the Admiral's species, a simple, aggressive gesture that sent a clear message. But to James, it wasn't just a gesture. It was a threat. And humans on a death world, didn't take threats lightly. The pressure at his throat felt like a vice, suffocating, and James felt the instinct rise within him. Fight. His body acted before his mind could process. With one smooth motion, he pivoted. His left hand trapped Velzikver's wrist, and his right arm slid under the Admiral's elbow. He twisted, forcing the alien's arm in the opposite direction. There was a sickening crack, a sharp snap of bone. Velzikver let out a shriek of pain as he collapsed, his arm twisted at a horrific angle. His face twisted in pain, his yellow eyes wide in shock as he dropped to the deck. The room was dead silent. James stood frozen, his hands still raised in a defensive stance, his breath shallow, heart pounding in his chest. His mind was a blur. What just happened? He looked around. The other cadets were staring, wide-eyed, some backed against the bulkhead, others frozen in disbelief. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. "Who's next?" James' voice was raw, shaking as it broke the silence. No one moved. The deck officer, a feathered Gorthari lieutenant, stumbled forward and slammed his hand onto the emergency beacon. Red lights flashed across the command deck as the medical team was called. Security forces rushed in, their blasters drawn but hovering at their sides. James exhaled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His hands shook as the adrenaline began to wear off. The reality of what he had just done crashed down on him. He had hurt the Admiral. He had broken his arm. The Gorthari lieutenant looked at him, his eyes filled with suspicion and fear. "I didn't mean to," James muttered to no one in particular. His voice was barely above a whisper. He looked at the blood staining his uniform, the deep purple blood that came from Velzikver's torn skin. The lieutenant stepped back, eyes never leaving him as the medical team arrived, followed by security officers, their hands hovering near their weapons. James sank to the floor, his back pressed against the cool deck plating. His fingers were shaking. He hadn't meant to hurt anyone. He hadn't meant to do any of this. But in that split second of survival, it had been his only option. Cliffhanger. The doors to the command deck slammed open. Admiral Selch, the Velkarn representative of the coalition, entered, his tall, muscular form filling the doorway. His dark eyes locked on James, and for the first time, James felt something cold and heavy settle in his gut. "What have you done?" The cold, steel floor of the Saracen Dawn seemed to press against James, each pulse of his heartbeat reverberating through his bones. The lights above flickered, casting harsh shadows across the deck, as the Velkarn Admiral Selch loomed at the doorway. His posture was rigid, his sharp features betraying no emotion, but the coldness in his eyes spoke volumes. James, still kneeling on the floor, hands shaking at his sides, couldn't bring himself to look up. The heavy silence stretched between them. The reality of what he had just done hung in the air like a storm cloud. He had broken an admiral's arm, a superior officer, no less. "What have you done?" Selch repeated, his voice low but filled with an undeniable anger. James swallowed hard, his throat still tight from the brief, violent encounter. "I didn't mean to," he whispered, his voice ragged. "I just reacted." Selch's dark gaze didn't waver. The Admiral's expression was unreadable, but the tension radiating from him was palpable. James could feel the weight of the Velkarn's stare, drilling into him like a heavy hammer. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The simulation was just that, a simulation. He was supposed to contain the situation, not escalate it. He had learned in Earth's training camps to act fast, to survive, to fight back when survival was at stake. It was instinct. But here, in the midst of the coalition, surrounded by dozens of alien species, instincts could be deadly. Selch took a step forward, his heavy boots thudding against the deck with an ominous rhythm. "You broke an admiral's arm in front of the entire squad, Cadet Halter. Do you understand what this means?" The words hit James like a slap. This wasn't just about the admiral's injury. The consequences were far more severe. His heart raced as his mind scrambled for a way out of this nightmare. "Yes, sir," James said, his voice barely audible. "I understand." Selch's eyes narrowed, studying him as if he were a specimen to be dissected. "You're lucky you're not dead." James' breath caught. He looked up, meeting Selch's gaze, confusion and dread swirling in his chest. "What do you mean?" The Admiral's lips twisted into something close to a sneer. "You're human. You're from Earth. Your species is unpredictable, volatile. Do you think you're the first to lash out when threatened?" James stiffened, his eyes wide. "I didn't lash out. I was just doing what I was trained for." The Admiral scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Training for a world like yours doesn't belong in the coalition, Cadet. Your training is a weapon. You're a weapon." The words stung like an open wound. Weapon. James had always thought of himself as a survivor, never as a tool for destruction. But now, in the eyes of the coalition, perhaps that's all he was, a threat. "I'm not a weapon," James said quietly, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. Selch took another step forward, looming over him. "Then explain to me why your first instinct was to break a superior officer's arm when every other cadet would have stood down and followed orders." James' jaw clenched. "I couldn't just stand there while the ship was falling apart. I had to act." He lowered his voice, almost as if to convince himself. I thought I was saving the ship. The reactor, it would have gone critical. The Admiral's eyes burned into him. You didn't save the ship. You nearly started a war. James blinked, trying to wrap his mind around the words. What do you mean? His voice shook. The Velkarn species doesn't tolerate being touched like that, Selch continued, his voice colder than before. You've violated an unspoken law, Cadet, and you'll have to answer for it. Before James could respond, the medics arrived. They moved quickly and efficiently, surrounding Velzikver, who was still unconscious, his arm twisted at an impossible angle. The quiet murmur of their voices and the swift movements of their hands only deepened the tension in the air. The Gorthari lieutenant stepped forward, giving James one last glance before turning to Selch. Medical team in position, sir. They're stabilizing the Admiral. Selch nodded but didn't look away from James. We'll see what happens when this reaches the Coalition Command Council. You've made a powerful enemy today, Cadet Halter. James clenched his fists, his mind racing. What did that mean? Enemy? He wasn't part of any alien faction. He wasn't even part of a military force beyond the Coalition's training program. He was a human from Earth, trying to make his way among the stars, among beings who had no idea what his world was like. But it was clear now. His presence here was a danger, not just for him, but for the entire Coalition. You'll be placed under observation, Selch said coldly, his voice an ice-cold blade. You're a liability now, a danger to the unity of the Coalition. The word stung, liability. Now, Selch continued, his voice cutting through the thick tension, I'll give you one chance to fix this. You will cooperate with the medical staff. You will undergo a full psychological evaluation, and you will comply with the investigations that follow. If you fail, he didn't finish the sentence. James nodded stiffly, feeling a cold sweat running down his spine. It wasn't over. Cliffhanger. As the medics worked quickly to stabilize Admiral Velzikver, the doors to the command deck opened once more. Captain Ross, the human officer who had overseen the cadet program, stepped inside. Her eyes met James, and her expression was unreadable. You've done it now, Cadet. The door to the command deck shut quietly behind Captain Ross, her footsteps echoing as she moved toward James, her eyes fixed on him with a piercing intensity. She didn't look like she had much sympathy for him, but there was something in her posture, something about the way she carried herself, that suggested she understood. You've done it now, Cadet, she said again, her voice low but not without a certain measure of gravitas. The words hung heavy in the air, like the inevitable fall of a guillotine. James glanced up at her, still kneeling on the cold metal deck, his hands shaking with the residual rush of adrenaline. He swallowed hard. I didn't mean to, Captain. I just reacted. It was survival. Ross stood over him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Captain Ross was an experienced officer, known for her no-nonsense approach to leadership. A human like him. A rare breed in the Coalition's ranks, especially with all the alien species vying for power and control. But it was clear that even she in this moment didn't quite know how to handle what had just happened. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. Survival? Tell me something, Cadet, she said, her voice shifting just a fraction. What's your idea of survival? James stared at her, unsure how to answer. The question caught him off guard. Survival to him had always been about acting first, about not hesitating when it came down to life or death. On Earth, survival meant making it through every day, not knowing whether you'd make it to the next. Survival, he began slowly, is about doing whatever it takes to stay alive. To protect those around you, you have to think fast, no second chances. Ross nodded, but there was something unreadable in her eyes. Was she agreeing with him or judging him? Survival's different for us, Cadet, she said after a long silence. For humans, it's instinctual, a reflex, but you're not on Earth anymore. This is the Coalition. Here, instincts can get you killed. James opened his mouth to respond, but Captain Ross raised a hand, silencing him. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you, Halter, she continued. What you did was reckless, and now we have to deal with the fallout. This isn't just about a broken arm. This is about trust. James felt his throat tighten. Trust. He wasn't even sure who he could trust anymore. He had always assumed that being here, among the stars, among so many species, meant a kind of unity. But now he understood that his very presence, his instincts, had made him an outsider, a dangerous outsider. The Velkarn don't forgive easily, Ross said, her tone hard. You've broken not just the Admiral's arm, but a foundational rule of the Coalition. Physical dominance doesn't belong here. What you see as self-defense, they see as an attack. James shifted uncomfortably, his mind spinning. So that's it. I'm a threat now, one mistake and I'm done. Ross didn't answer immediately, her gaze hardening as she studied him. She sighed after a beat, her shoulders slumping just a fraction. It's not that simple, but yes, you've made things infinitely harder for yourself. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. James stood up slowly, his legs shaking from the sudden movement. His body still felt like it was on high alert, the adrenaline refusing to wear off. He looked at Captain Ross, trying to find something in her eyes that would tell him it was going to be okay. But there was nothing there to reassure him. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, James said quietly, his voice tight with emotion. I thought I was helping. I know you did, Ross said, her voice softening for the first time. But here, helping doesn't always work the way you think it will. That's something you'll have to learn the hard way. Before James could reply, the door to the deck slid open again, and Selch, the Velkarn Admiral, entered with a sharp look in his eyes. His expression was less cold now, but the weight of his injury, his arm still wrapped in a high-tension brace, was a reminder of what had happened. Captain, he said, his voice low but controlled, I'd like a word with the cadet. Ross looked at Selch with a calculating gaze. Are you sure you want to deal with this yourself, Admiral? Selch's lips curled into a faint, almost bitter smile. Yes, this is my responsibility now, I'll handle it. Ross gave a small nod, stepping back. She didn't say anything more, but the look she gave James before she turned to leave spoke volumes. Good luck. James swallowed hard and turned his attention to the Velkarn Admiral, who approached him with slow, deliberate steps. He still towered over him, but there was something different in the Admiral's demeanor now, something less aggressive, more calculated. Cadet Halter, Selch said, his voice deep, his gaze piercing. You've made a significant mistake, one that will have far-reaching consequences. James nodded, knowing he couldn't deny it. He wasn't expecting forgiveness, but there was a part of him that still wished for understanding. I've reviewed the footage, Selch continued, his tone cold but measured. You acted reflexively. I understand that as a human you are conditioned to respond that way, but what you've done in a military context, it's insubordination. James winced at the word, insubordination. I wasn't insubordinate, he said quietly, though the words tasted bitter. I was trying to save everyone. Selch's expression darkened slightly. You did save everyone, but the way you did it has jeopardized much more than just this training simulation. You've jeopardized the unity of the entire coalition. James felt a knot form in his stomach. What do you mean? Selch didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood there, his massive form looming over James. Finally, he spoke. You've given every species in the coalition something to question, Selch said, his voice grim. They'll question how humans are integrated into this alliance, how humans, Deathworlders, handle stress, leadership, and protocol. I don't know if that's something we can ever undo. The words hit James like a punch to the gut. He hadn't just broken an arm, he had broken trust. Trust that had taken years to build between species, between cultures. He had destroyed a fragile bond with his own hands. I didn't mean to, James whispered again, his voice cracked. I was just trying to survive. Selch's gaze softened for a moment, just a fleeting instant, before the Admiral regained his composure. There is no just here, Halter, not when you're dealing with lives other than your own. Cliffhanger. James was still processing the weight of Selch's words when the door to the command deck opened again. Captain Ross re-entered, but this time her expression had changed. It was a mix of concern and calculation. You need to come with me, Halter, she said, her voice tight. There's a council meeting. The Admiral's injury is being investigated. James' heart sank. What does that mean? It means your future here is about to be decided, she said, and the outcome isn't looking good. The long hallway leading to the Coalition Command Council felt colder with each step. The metallic walls, lined with symbols from each species in the Coalition, gleamed faintly under the harsh overhead lights. James walked between Captain Ross and Admiral Selch, both of whom seemed focused and solemn, as if preparing themselves for whatever was about to unfold. The air was thick with tension, the echoes of their footsteps bouncing off the walls like reminders of what had happened. Ross's silence was deafening, her usual sharp presence gone. She had been the only one to show even a hint of sympathy after the incident, but now she seemed to have no words left to offer. The quiet concern in her eyes was all James could read as they walked. James felt the knot in his stomach tighten. What would the Council decide? The Coalition Command Council was the body that oversaw the unity of the diverse species and kept the peace. This was their chance to examine the incident that had shaken their trust in one of the humans, one of the Deathworlders. If the Council saw his actions as a threat to interspecies cooperation, it could mean the end of his career here. He wasn't sure he could survive another rejection. He had barely survived his life on Earth, and now this was something else entirely. The doors to the council chamber loomed ahead, tall and imposing, covered in intricate patterns from various species' cultures. Ross paused in front of them, her back straight. She turned to James, her eyes meeting his. "This isn't just about you, Cadet," she said softly. "The council doesn't just want answers, they want a show of control. They want to see you break. They want to know if humans like you can be trusted, if your kind can be held accountable when things go wrong." James looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. "So this is a test." She nodded, "And you've already failed one part of it, but that doesn't mean you can't still pass the rest." She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Just remember, don't let them see you break, no matter what happens." With that, Ross pushed the doors open, and James stepped into the chamber, his mind racing with thoughts of what awaited him. The room was large, circular, and bathed in the soft glow of the ambient lighting. 12 representatives from different species sat at the curved table in the center, their eyes fixed on him. Some were familiar, like Admiral Selch, and others were completely alien, their forms completely unfamiliar to James. A Tarsini officer with an insect-like face and translucent wings folded neatly behind her back gestured for James to approach. Her voice was soft but firm. "Cadet Halter, stand before the council. Your actions are being evaluated." James did as instructed, standing at attention as the representatives studied him. He could feel the weight of their gazes, the judgment already heavy in the air. "This is a simple matter," the Valeri representative began, her voice high-pitched and calm. "A cadet acted in a manner contrary to the protocols that bind this alliance. He acted impulsively. He assaulted a superior officer. What explanation does he offer?" James swallowed. Assaulted. That word echoed in his head, a reminder of the fracture he had caused, not just in Admiral Velzikver's arm, but in everything he had fought for in this coalition. "I acted in self-defense, Counselor," James said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The Admiral grabbed me by the collar. I thought it was a threat. I reacted the only way I knew how." Another council member, the Drelak representative, a bulky, amphibious alien with glowing eyes, leaned forward. "Self-defense? You expect us to believe that? You don't understand the consequences of your actions, human. You didn't just act in self-defense. You acted without consideration for protocol, without thinking of the interspecies harmony we've worked so hard to maintain." James' jaw clenched. They didn't get it. They didn't understand what Earth was like. They didn't understand what he had been through. The Charnathi liaison, a bioluminescent alien whose skin shimmered with soft blues and greens, added softly, "We all understand your position, Cadet Halter, but you must understand ours. This alliance is based on respect. Respect for the cultures, for the differences between us all. You cannot act on impulse, not in the coalition." A chilling silence fell over the room. James felt a sudden weight on his shoulders, the realization that his entire future depended on the next words that came out of his mouth. "I understand, Counselor," he said, his voice steady. "I made a mistake. I was too quick to react, too quick to defend myself." He hesitated. "But my instinct was to save the ship, to save the lives of everyone on board. That's all I've ever done. I'm not here to hurt anyone." "We know that, Halter," said a voice from the back. The Tarsini officer who had called him forward now spoke again. Her wings fluttered softly as she leaned forward, her eyes scanning the room. "The question is, can you work with others without acting on instinct? Can you be trusted to follow our rules, to be part of this coalition without risking lives in the process?" James took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. He had to show them that he was more than just a reflex, more than just a human from a violent, unpredictable world. "Yes, I can," he said, with more conviction than he felt. "I've learned my lesson. I'll follow the protocols. I'll learn how to work with others, how to control myself." The Valeri representative narrowed her eyes, as if considering his words. After a long pause, she turned to the others, her voice steady. This is not just about Cadet Halter's actions. It is about humanity's place within this coalition. She turned back to James. We have seen what your kind can do when pushed, and we have seen what happens when they are given trust. The question is, can we risk giving you that trust again? Cliffhanger. The tension in the chamber grew thick. All eyes were on James, and he could feel the weight of their judgment. Just as the silence threatened to crush him, the Tarsini officer spoke again, her voice sharp but not unkind. We are not without mercy. You will be given a second chance, Cadet Halter. The room stirred. The Valeri nodded slowly, the council members exchanging glances, but the catch wasn't lost on him. There was always a catch. However, the Tarsini continued, this will not be a free pass. You will undergo a series of tests, physical, psychological, and cultural. If you pass these, you will be reinstated. But if you fail... Her voice trailed off ominously. James nodded, his heart pounding. I'll pass, counselor. I'll prove I can be trusted. The council members murmured amongst themselves, their voices barely audible as they debated amongst themselves. One last test. That was all that stood between him and his future in the coalition. But as the chamber doors closed behind him, a shadow of doubt lingered. Could he truly prove he wasn't a danger to them all? Could he be trusted? The weight of the coalition's future rested on his shoulders. The following days felt like an endless blur to James. The weight of the council's judgment still pressed on him, and every moment seemed to carry the echo of the council's words. You will be tested. He spent hours in isolation, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. Could he pass these tests? Could he show them that he wasn't just some impulsive human driven by survival instincts? He tried to focus, but the doubts wouldn't go away. The council had given him a chance, yes. But the second chance came with a heavy price. He would have to prove that humans like him could be trusted. That meant facing his worst fears, his survival instincts, and controlling them in a way that felt foreign to him. James had always known how to survive, how to react in extreme situations. But this was different. This was about control, discipline. A soft chime echoed through the small room where he'd been confined. The trial had begun. James stood up quickly, brushing the sweat from his palms. The door slid open, and standing there was Captain Ross. Her usual stern expression softened just a little. Time for the first test, Cadet. Her voice was firm, but there was something else in her eyes, a flicker of support or maybe sympathy. She wasn't just his superior officer anymore. She was his mentor now, guiding him through the very thing that could decide his future. James nodded and followed her down the long hallway. He was led to a large, sterile training room, unlike anything he'd seen before. The walls were blank, devoid of any distinctive markings. The floor was cushioned, designed for simulations and physical tests. Ross stood at the entrance, watching him closely. This is the first test, Halter. It's simple. You'll face an alien species that doesn't know you. You're to interact with them, build trust, and navigate a potential conflict without using force or physical dominance. You're to use words, not actions. James stared at the blank space before him, trying to process the task. Words. The alien species was unknown to him, and he had to build trust without letting his emotions or instincts dictate the interaction. His first thought was that it was impossible, but Ross was looking at him, waiting for him to respond. What species is it? James asked, his voice quiet, the weight of uncertainty still hanging over him. You'll find out soon enough. Ross's tone was flat. Your success here will depend on your ability to adapt, not to survive, but to build a connection. Before James could ask anything more, the door on the far side of the room slid open. A figure stepped through, and James froze. The alien was tall, easily 7 feet in height, with dark, smooth skin that seemed to shimmer faintly under the lighting. Its limbs were long and gangly, but its eyes, large and silvery, locked onto James with an intense gaze that sent a chill down his spine. The alien's posture was rigid, its face unreadable. It tilted its head slightly, observing James. It wasn't aggressive, but the distance between them felt palpable, as if this creature was waiting for him to make the first move. Greetings, human. The voice was deep, resonant, but somehow distant. James wasn't sure how to react to the tone. Was it curious or threatening? James took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenge. This wasn't Earth. This wasn't a street fight or a moment of desperation. This was a diplomatic test. "Greetings," James said slowly, trying to make his voice sound steady. "I'm Cadet James Halter." He paused, unsure of what to say next. "I come in peace." The alien didn't move, its eyes studying him. The silence between them grew thick, uncomfortable. James could feel the pressure building. What did this creature want from him? Finally, the alien spoke again, its voice oddly neutral. "You humans have a reputation. You are known for your strength and your unpredictability, your survival instincts." The last words were punctuated with a hint of curiosity. "But what else do you offer?" The question hit James like a punch. What else did they offer? He had never thought of himself as part of a species, but a person. He thought of Earth, of all the pain and violence, and yet the moments of kindness, of survival in the face of impossible odds. "We offer cooperation," he said, his voice growing more confident. "We offer trust." The alien cocked its head, clearly intrigued. "Trust!" The word seemed to roll off its tongue as if it was unfamiliar. "Then prove it." James' heart hammered in his chest. He had no idea what the alien was asking, but one thing was clear. This was a test of more than just diplomacy. It was a test of humanity. He didn't know what was coming, but he couldn't back down. He had to prove that humanity could adapt, that they could be trusted. The alien stepped forward, its steps deliberate but not threatening. It seemed to be waiting for James to make the next move. James took a breath and stepped forward as well, narrowing the gap between them. He held his hands open, a silent gesture of peace. "I don't know what you want from me, but I'm willing to learn." The alien's silvery eyes glinted, and for a moment it almost seemed to smile. "Then you have passed the first trial." James blinked in surprise. "That's it, I didn't even do anything." "You've done more than you think," the alien's voice softened. "You showed patience, understanding, the willingness to engage. These are things that few species understand." James felt the pressure lifting slightly. The alien wasn't hostile, it hadn't attacked, it was observing, and he had passed the first test. The realization hit him hard. He had done it without violence. He had done it by simply being human. Cliffhanger. But as the alien stepped back, nodding in approval, the room suddenly shifted. The walls began to glow, and a strange hum filled the air. A new challenge appeared. Another door slid open, and a second alien stepped forward. This one was different. Its movements were swift, aggressive, its eyes filled with hostility. The trial was far from over. "Your next test begins now, human." The tension in the room escalated as the second alien stepped forward, its movements quick and decisive. James' body went rigid as his instincts flared. This one was different. The first alien had been cautious, curious, even somewhat understanding. But this one? There was no mistaking the hostility in its posture, the narrowed gaze, and the twitch of its claws. The door behind it closed with a soft hiss, sealing James in with the unknown. His heart rate quickened, the adrenaline already rising as the creature stalked closer, its glowing eyes never leaving his face. "The trial is far from over, human," the new alien spoke, its voice low, almost a growl. "You've shown some restraint, some cooperation, but that was a game. Now you will face a true challenge." James's eyes darted to Captain Ross, who had been observing silently from the sidelines. She gave him a brief nod, the smallest flicker of encouragement in her eyes. But her face was tight, and he could tell she was just as unsure about what was about to happen as he was. The new alien stood tall, its body sleek and muscular, covered in a smooth, dark exoskeleton. Its four eyes, arranged symmetrically on either side of its head, watched James like a predator sizing up its prey. The alien extended one of its long arms, the claws on its fingers gleaming in the dim light. "Prove you can trust us, human." James swallowed, his throat dry. "How?" The alien's voice dropped, almost a whisper. "You must pass this trial without aggression. You must show me that your race can handle pressure without resorting to violence." Ross stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Halter, this is not the same as the first trial. This time you must face your opponent directly. You must prove yourself worthy of a place among us, worthy of our trust." James nodded, his chest tight, his pulse still pounding. This wasn't a test of diplomacy. It wasn't about building trust through words. It was a test of his discipline, his ability to control the reflexes that had been drilled into him since childhood. "You'll have to use everything you've learned," Ross continued. "Not just about other species, but about yourself, about your own instincts. This trial isn't just a challenge from them, it's a challenge from your own past, from who you are as a human." The alien in front of him took another step, closer now. Its claws clicked ominously on the floor as it moved into a combat stance. "You will face me, human, and you will prove to me that you are more than your survival instinct." The air was thick with the tension of the moment. James had no weapon. He wasn't even sure if he was allowed to strike back. This wasn't just a fight, it was a test. A test of everything he had learned in this strange new world. He had spent years learning how to fight, how to survive, how to win. But this was something else entirely. The alien made a sudden movement, an almost imperceptible shift in its stance. It was coming at him. Without thinking, James moved to counter, his body already in motion, the instinctive survival tactics kicking in before his mind had time to process. He reached out, his hand grabbing the alien's wrist to stop the strike. But instead of slamming the alien to the ground, instead of using the devastating force that his training had ingrained in him, James pulled his hand back at the last second. His muscles screamed as the alien's claws came dangerously close to his skin. He was close enough to feel the heat emanating from the creature's exoskeleton, to hear the low hum of its bioenergy. He couldn't do it. He couldn't strike back. James froze, his hand hovering in midair, a fraction of an inch away from the alien's throat. The instant was frozen in time, a moment where every ounce of his survival instincts told him to fight. But then he let go. The alien paused, its eyes narrowing. "You stopped." It was more of a statement than a question. "You didn't attack." James could feel the sweat running down his face, his heart hammering in his chest. He had done it. He had stopped himself. The alien stepped back, eyeing him closely as if trying to make sense of the action. "You are not like the others, human," the alien said, its voice surprisingly calm now. "You have proven that you can control your instincts. You have proven that you are more than just a weapon." James exhaled, not realizing until then how badly he had been holding his breath. His chest felt tight, but a small sense of relief started to creep in. He had done it. He had passed. But as the alien stepped back, its voice rang out again, this time carrying an edge of finality. "But the real trial comes now. You have shown restraint. Now you will prove your worthiness by choosing." James blinked, confusion spreading across his face. Choosing. The alien turned, gesturing toward a darkened corner of the room where a new figure emerged from the shadows. A third alien, this one smaller with an almost humanoid appearance. James' heart skipped a beat as he recognized it. "Captain Ross?" he asked in disbelief, his voice shaking. Ross, who had been standing silently in the back, now stepped forward. She was not smiling, not showing any emotion, her face as unreadable as ever. "Yes, James, it's your choice." The alien who had been watching him stepped back. "Choose now, human. Choose who you trust. Choose whether to save your companion or to continue your path. One choice and only one. If you choose wrong," the alien's voice trailed off ominously. James' head was spinning. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't just a test of survival or control. This was about trusting someone else. And the stakes had just gotten a whole lot higher. Cliffhanger. James stood frozen, the weight of the choice pressing down on him. Captain Ross or his future with the Coalition? Could he trust the mentor who had guided him, or would choosing her mean losing everything? The alien's voice cut through the silence. "Time is running out, human, your choice." The silence in the room was deafening, the weight of the alien's challenge pressing down on James like an oppressive force. Captain Ross, standing in the shadows, was the only figure that mattered now, the only one that stood between him and the unknown consequences of his decision. His mind raced as the alien's words echoed in his ears. "Choose who you trust." He had known from the beginning that trust would be the key to his survival in the Coalition, but this was something entirely different. This wasn't just about surviving the physical trials. It was about choosing a side, choosing who, or what, he believed in. Captain Ross had been his mentor, his ally in this strange new world. She had guided him through the training, shown him what it meant to be part of the Coalition. But now, he had to decide if her trust was something worth clinging to. His chest tightened as he thought about the implications of his choice. If he trusted her, it meant abandoning everything he had learned up until now about self-reliance. If he chose her, he would be choosing to place himself at the mercy of the Coalition, forever tied to their rules, their politics. Would they see him as a tool, a failure? But if he didn't choose her, if he chose to continue on his own path, without the guidance of the humans who had mentored him, then he was choosing isolation. He would have to face every alien species alone, with nothing but his own instincts to guide him. He looked at Ross, at her unreadable expression. There was no sign of encouragement, no hint of emotion. She had never been one to show vulnerability, and it was clear now that this was a test not just of his strength, but of his ability to truly understand trust. Finally, James's heart seemed to settle into a rhythm of its own. Trust wasn't just about following orders. It wasn't about relying on others to make the right choice for him. Trust was about recognizing the value of the connection between people, even if it meant risk, even if it meant embracing the very thing that made him feel vulnerable. "I trust you," James said, his voice steady and clear. The moment the words left his mouth, the tension in the room seemed to release. The alien who had been watching him, the one with the unsettling intensity, nodded slowly, as if it had been expecting this answer. "Very well, human." The alien's voice was softer now, almost respectful. "You have chosen your ally, you have chosen trust." Ross stepped forward, her eyes locking with his. Her posture remained poised, but there was a brief flicker of emotion in her eyes, pride. Relief, he wasn't sure, but there was something there, something unspoken. She had tested him, but she had also been part of his journey. As the alien turned away, signaling the end of the trial, Ross spoke again, her voice lower this time. "You've done well, Halter." "Is it over?" James asked, the weight of the situation slowly lifting from his shoulders. Ross nodded. "For now, the Council will have to review your actions, but you've passed. More importantly, you've proved something to yourself. You didn't just pass the test, they tested your humanity, and you showed them that you're capable of more than just fighting." James stood a little straighter, the realization slowly dawning on him. He had done it. He had proven that humanity could adapt, that it could be trusted to coexist, not just through force, but through understanding. "But I still have to face the Council, don't I?" James asked, his voice tentative. Ross gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Yes, but now you'll face them with the knowledge that you've earned something most of your kind never get, a true place in the Coalition." Just as she finished speaking, the alien who had given him the test turned to face them again. "Your actions have been noted, human. The Council will reconvene to finalize your status. But make no mistake, you have earned respect today." James felt the weight of that statement settle over him. Respect. He had earned it through more than just combat, more than survival. He had earned it through his ability to choose trust, to choose humanity. As they walked out of the room, the alien who had acted as the challenger gave him one last look. "You will be watched, human, but you have the opportunity to prove yourself further." "Thank you," James said, his voice steady now. It was more than just words, it was an acknowledgement of the journey that had brought him here. Ross gave him a look of approval, and the two of them walked down the corridor together, the soft hum of the ship's engines filling the air. The future ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like forever, James had a sense of purpose. Epilogue: The path ahead. Weeks passed as the Coalition Command Council deliberated over James' future. The tests he had endured, the decisions he had made, were scrutinized closely by the Council members of all species. But through it all, one thing remained clear. James Halter, the human from Earth, had proven himself. He had earned the respect of the Council and the trust of Captain Ross. And in doing so, he had secured his place in the Coalition, not just as a survivor, but as a symbol of humanity's potential for cooperation, adaptability, and understanding. His next assignment, still classified, would take him into deeper reaches of the galaxy, working with species he had yet to encounter. But now, as he stood on the deck of the Dawn, watching the stars drift by, he felt something new inside him. Hope. Humanity had a place here among the stars. And he had earned it one choice at a time.